Okay, so I hope you all had some nice coffee and some nice conversation and are all refreshed now for a discussion on this topic about assessment methodologies, and finally also perhaps some questions to Matti. But I think we'll start with asking our panel about their views. We've heard presentation of quite broadly what Chalmers do as relates to assessments of bioenergy concepts. And I'd like you to reflect, wonder if you can say something about how important you think that such types of assessments are and what role they can play, whether in technology development or in policy making or in industrial decision making. Yes, please.
Well, again, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I'm quite impressed what you're doing also in this area. Again, me being Perstop, I have two hats, one on biofuels and one on chemicals. And on the biofuel side, LCA and sustainability assessment is vital for the survival of a business. And we have gone through a full cycle from 10, 15 years ago when renewables were introduced in Europe. Everybody was happy with biofuels being non-fossil. After time, there has been more and more stringent rules on sustainability criteria, on how you calculate greenhouse gas efficiency, and how you start to look into indirect land use effects. So coming from being a sort of green hero, now I need to every day defend why I use bio-based fuels. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a development we need to anticipate, and we need to maybe have policy to align with. And here I think you can do a big work in showing good models. And I'm sure the same discussion will come when we use large volumes of biomass in chemicals and other products.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, this is the area where I'm really shallow. So I have a difficulty to go into the substance, but I could actually use a couple of examples to highlight how we have, in the opposite way, we used to be a lot hammered by environmental organizations, NGOs, ENGOs, etc. But now we are much more positively seen when developing and bringing new bio-based materials and material solutions with less and less resources used to the customers and the markets. And on the landscape level, the high intense biomass production, landscape level, I think we have a quite neat example in Brazil, in our joint venture with Fibria, Southern Bahia, where we have a mosaic landscape of eucalyptus plantations with native Atlantic rainforest in the valleys between. So it forms a really nice mosaic landscape, and this is even recognized as a very good example by WWF. So they never give us any positive credit, but they think it's a good example. On that level, they honor the concept. But when it comes to ecosystem services, then I have a difficulty to understand the concept, but I started to think about how do we utilize, or how do the local community utilize our plantation bases, for example, then in Brazil and in other places of the world, other companies' plantations. And one example that came into my mind was there is a significant share of acacia honey at the stores, in the stores also in Sweden. And we have one example with the honey producing family, around the eucalyptus plantations in Bahia as well, and there are more around in the neighborhood. But things like this, how would a honey production part of a biomass producing landscape be taken into account in the LCA?
Can you say something about that, Marty, perhaps? Do you dare?
Is it on? Yes. The honey production is a provisioning service, I would say. So it is a consequence of good management of the landscape, I would argue. So it would definitely be seen as a positive effect of what you have been doing together with your partner in Brazil. How to assess it? I don't know. and what and how to quantify it? Maybe you can. There are efforts to quantify ecosystem services in terms of monetary value. So that may be one way to do that with honey production, since it is an economic value added.
Okay, thank you. What about you?
Well, first of all, Masseria, thank you for a good presentation. And I can only emphasize what Lars said here earlier on, that these type of assessments are becoming more and more increasingly important in making the right choices. And now with the proposed system for reduction quotas in Sweden, it's even more commercially important, because now there's a definite sort of monetary figure in doing these type of assessment right. And I think looking back as Lars did, that we as a company don't want to put money and resources into projects that along the line will end up not viewed upon as sort of good from a environmental and eco-service viewpoint. So it's very important, and you guys doing research on this will be key to the industry to make the right choices going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
and well, I think we of course I agree what the others say. I mean, this is important. We have to guarantee that whatever kind of fuels we are using in our plants is kind of sustainable in some way. And of course, sustainable, the word sustainable has very many different components. So it could be kind of environmentally sustainable, it could be from a climate perspective, societal factors and so on. And so I think we are working, of course, we are using a lot of biomass in our plant, and of course that's mainly waste coming in, coming from Swedish sawmills and paper mills and so on. I think we have quite a good view on the kind of sustainability of what we have already. But being a global company, we also working a lot, for example, with biogas, and biogas can be very different. In Sweden, it's a waste-based system where we create biogas from biomass, but it's also a waste treatment process where we use waste and refine waste to something, and we also produce a biofertilizer. So it's quite complex systems, and they also vary from different countries. And for example, in Germany, biomass is very much based on crops. And there we had the discussion about competition between land as a food versus fuel, of course. So, and that has very much stopped the development in Germany because people don't, and also from a kind of a landscape point of view, you probably also travel through Germany, seeing all these maize fields that don't look very nice. So it's not only kind of hard factors, I think, that are important to evaluate, but also these soft factors. What do people think about this technology? Even if it's kind of from an environmentally, it's quite sound. The figures looks very nice, but it doesn't really take off because of other factors. So I think that, I don't know how you evaluate that. And I also had a couple of other comments concerning how you do this evaluation. For example, how you compare you use fossil fuel prices, for example. That's a global commodity, so that's of course easy to find in prices, and you can also extrapolate if it's. You can always be sure it's 100%. You're never right. That's for sure. But then, of course, the local, for example, wood fuel prices are very local. And I just was curious how you kind of take that into account when you do your evaluation, these kind of local factors versus the global factors. I think I'll...
Do you dare try to answer that? Or should we hand it over to you?
Yeah, maybe Simon is more qualified to answer that question, actually. It's not my own work, so...
Okay, you're running. Yeah, Matti's been presenting what lots of groups do, so...
I was kind of expected I would be drawn in somewhere. Well, thank you, Matti, for having extended my own presentation time by doing a good job. And we of course, drifted into the thorny issue of the thoughts and the ideas behind trying to price biomass in the future. That is a hot research topic, so I think we've only tried to scratch the future there, and that is we've an assumption of a willingness to pay based on the idea of it being a fossil-free alternative. And if you follow that thought all the way down the road, you end up with absurdly high biomass prices. So the short answer to any questions is we would welcome an interesting research dialogue with anyone who has some qualified input to the question. But it's a very important issue because, of course, it's economic decisions are going to be the driver behind all biorefineries, and biomass is a local commodity in some respects, but some types of biomass will become an international tradable commodity with probably a very different price drivers, and how that mix will see in the future, I think is a very difficult question. So we're very interested in that issue.
Okay. Thank you, Simon.
Can I have
a
question?
Sure. If you don't talk too long.
I never talk too long. I had in mind to take that up in the general one, but I can take it now. Is biomass a local resource? There are several studies, and we have also done studies, for example, of taking biomass. You can chip it, you can do different things with it, and ship it in different ways, and so on. And if we look at taking it from Balticum, for example, to Stenungsund, that was one case study. It's not that impossible, not at all, and not for economy and not for the climate consequences. So shall we always look at biomass as a local resource? Question.
Yeah, please.
If I may start on the biofuel side, I think it's not a local but a global commodity. There is huge volumes of vegetable oils traded and sent from South America and Southeast Asia into Europe. Most of the ethanol used in Europe comes from South America. And I also think there is a lot of wood being shipped over Atlantic, but that's more for you.
Yeah, there is wood shipments going. But there is not actually the cheap assortments going any longer distances. And of course you can argue that biomass will be a commodity over long distances if you happen to be the only smart guy utilizing this resource. But what we have seen over the decades is wherever we are in the world, on this globe, the higher the utilization, the local or regional utilization of biomass, any fraction, become, the smaller the actual market geography become. So if we take, for example, Sweden, there is absolutely no national Swedish market. There is a lot of small local markets around energy plants, around pulp and paper mills, etc. So these markets are very, very local because the utilization rate is fairly high. And as soon as the biomass utilization is starting to expand in the Baltic area, that local use will outstrip the export to Stenungsund. That I can almost promise you, because we are in the same EU. So there is some kind of leveling out of subsidies in a 5-year period.
But if you're to speculate a bit, would this hold also for more refined biomass, kinds of biomass such as ethanol or vegetable oils and that sort of thing?
Let me take one example. Some old experts from our industry said, trees, remember these 3 things. Trees are local, pulp is global. But when you go to the next step, to paper, for example, or packaging material or tissue, that's again regional. So there are certain things that are global, including vegetable oils, ethanol, but when you go to specialities in the next step, they might very well be back to local or regional markets.
Okay. You agree, the rest of you? Yeah, okay.
I agree with that. That some bio components are very much global. I mean, we see that, as Lars said, we get a lot of oils and fatty acids coming in from Southeast Asia and ethanol from South America. And I know that F3 made a research study on looking into how the logistical system should look like around bio-based fuels, and they came to the conclusion it really doesn't matter because transportation cost will be irrelevant. I don't think they looked at sort of the hard bottlenecks that you can come to when dealing with large volumes of very bulky material. In those volumes that we are talking about from a refinery perspective, then you can run into sort of local constraints in getting the trucks into the refinery area. So I think that
storage areas and so on.
Then a sort of a distributed, centralized value chain would be more appropriate when you're talking about really bulky fuels. So you can argue, will the liquid fuels market go into that, into buying large volumes of virgin biomass? I really don't see that. I think that you need to some extent get a higher energy density to make it work in large scale.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that was their conclusion.
Tore, you will be allowed to talk in a little bit. Before we conclude this panel discussion, I'd like to ask you also, you've heard what we're doing at Chalmers. Are there any gaps you see in that? Are there aspects we fail to address, or system levels that are important that we're not looking at? Or are there perhaps specific case studies, fields of investigation that you'd like to see us look into in more detail? Now, Matti has not gone through all our case studies we are doing, but I think you know some of it. Yes?
I don't know case studies, but I think what would be needed on the globe is some kind of consensus on land use for crops, for human food, and for biomass, for carbon mitigation or climate mitigation effects. Because today a lot of these things compete. It gets very quickly a very sensitive discussion, which is very often industry loses because there are always poor people somewhere who are starving. But many sources say that there is indeed abundant land to grow both food and biomass for energy. And that is debated all over the world. Would Chalmers be able to contribute to some kind of consensus or standard that would be most helpful? A totally different subject is standardization of LCAs for chemicals that goes into end uses. I often take my telephone as an example. This contains a number of chemicals, partly that we produce in Stenungsund. It could be coatings, could be adhesives, plastics, and many things. If I would like to declare that this is better than the neighbors, because this has been using biogas from Sweden, from over maybe, or something, how would such a system work that can have a sort of a global standard on LCA going all the way down the value chain into the end consumer products? You can declare that this object is 38% CO2 efficient and that one is something else. Two simple questions.
Thank you.
I would like to pick up the energy system modeling and especially the demand side management, where I think reality is maybe even more advanced and have more options in use than what research studies are revealing actually today, especially when it comes to flexibility of the prosumers.
Okay.
Those who are both producers and consumers. So that is a tool that is important to take into account, both when it comes to support the electricity system, for example, when there is lack of electricity or high prices, and also support the system when there is an oversupply.
Are you then talking about consumers, or are you talking
No,
also about
prosumers.
Industrial consumers?
Prosumers.
Okay.
A consumer that also is a producer.
Yeah, all right. I get it, yes.
On industrial scale, this is much more common.
Yes, sure.
And you can have some impact to the system. If you have 50 megawatt to play with up and down, instead of having half a kilowatt.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. What about you?
No, I think I agree with you both. Are we talking about just on LCA or
no, and on these assessments more broadly?
In a broader sense, I would say that coming from an industry that has not been given that much attention over the last 40 years in terms of technology-wise, because I mean, the refining industry has quite a long history where there's a well-established license or market in place. However, now when we're moving into the bioeconomy era, then not much attention is given from these traditional licensing companies into technologies like this that we are interested in. So I know that Louise Olsson is working in terms of hydroprocessing, which is very good. But here I think Chalmers can do more job in sort of connecting the industry that Mikael is representing to my own in terms of real hardcore technology developments.
Okay, thank you. What about Eon?
No, I just want to stress what Lars said about the land use. I think it's extremely important to be able to understand the competition issue about land. I mean, is there sufficient? How do we impact for example, food production by using land for biomass production. And I think it's more about understanding this and being able to explain it in a good way than having a figure that it's all right or not, because it's not really, there is no good figure or bad figure. It's more about understanding and being able to explain that. And then one final remark, and that's of course, with doing scenarios, it's very difficult. I mean, it's as I said, it's 100% probability that you are wrong, more or less. I think the world is also changing quite rapidly. You have a lot of disruptive technologies that are kind of coming into your way, and I think you have to deal with that also somehow. We have. I mean, last year we had made a 16 billion euro loss because we were not able to predict the kind of the collapse of the German nuclear system. Collapse is not a good word, but you know what I mean. So I think having some view on a disruptive system when you do scenarios is more or less a must, and how to be able to treat them. So.
That's good.
Maybe
We'll take that one with us.
We do disruptive scenario analysis now. Just a note.
Okay. Thank you so much for your input. I think we have many valuable things to take home and start looking into and prioritizing among and so on. So thank you so much. Let me open the floor to the audience and hear whether there are any additional comments, questions, views. We're all tired, are we?
Everything is crystal clear.
Yeah. You're part of the floor. Now come on. Okej. Vi ska prata I micken.
Annars kommer det in I kameran. Okay.
Okay.
No, I don't have especially now. I will broaden the subject a little now after and take these activities into account also when I discuss.
So let's end this session, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Machi. Kan du få den här hemska grejen?
Can I hear now? Yes. It has been a long day now, and I will have some final discussion points. I won't be very long because we are almost a little tired, all of us now. But there are some things that I would like to bring up. I haven't asked that earlier because I have waited until this more general discussion. We have now seen a lot of opportunities for reducing CO2 emissions in industry. What Matti showed was that the GHG impact and also economically will change in the future depending on how the different parts of both the internal and external systems will change. And you also showed that the external systems will change and have a big impact on that. So in order to make strategic decisions in industry, you have lots of different options technically. You have lots of uncertainties economically and in terms of climate change opportunities. you have scenarios that you can develop, which can sometimes be disruptive, and you cannot rely on them totally. So there are very many different uncertainties when you shall make strategic decisions, also in industry, given all these options. So I would like to put a very difficult question, and I would like to have a yes on that. If you see a further interest and necessity that we work more together between industry and researchers in these very difficult areas. For example, develop scenarios which we can believe in, and not saying that that scenario shall be valid or that scenario, but to see where are the robust options given different scenarios, so to say, for example. And also take into account what we have called these new type of LCA, looking for the future and such things. It's a very broad question, but it's important. Do you see that there is an importance to work more together in order to have better decision-making in industry in strategic decisions? Yeah, for all of you, for any of you. Yes. Because I see that is, yeah. Do you see that interest? Yes.
Question is slightly leading, I think, into a
certain
direction.
But I would like you to comment upon those things. How you look upon this from industry? Yes.
Well, if I start, I think the day has proven that there are many, many areas, and we have heard a lot of good examples on research that Chalmers is doing that is very relevant for my company. I've been sort of actively trying to comment all of this in different ways. So absolutely, if we want to go forward and develop our industry in Sweden, we need to cooperate even more. And I think these are very good examples of areas we need to cooperate more on. Was that the answer you wanted?
No. I know it's a leading comment or question, but of course it's interesting to hear your comments from industry, how we look upon these things.
As you said, you wanted to have a yes, so you get the yes.
Yes.
But I would also point out the extraordinary challenge in researching the future.
Yes.
From where, for that typical research, you lack facts to base the research on. So it will be, call it speculative or scenario based or whatever. But of course, it will be challenging, but utmost interesting if you can present it and discuss it maybe much more with decision makers in industry than what has been, at least my view, this far.
It's a bit like voting, yes or
no. It's more commenting.
I vote
please.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think this is also for us as industry representatives. It's a good platform actually.
Yes. To
meet and to discuss these topics and also get kind of the scientific input for our work and also feedback our less scientific but maybe sometimes more kind of down to earth input to you. So I think it's a good platform, actually. So
I can only agree with all three previous speakers. I think that one of the most important things in this type of collaboration is that it allows researchers to get a bit more down to earth and understand what is actually going on in sort of the real world, and for us in the real world to understand or rise above, these sort of everyday issues that you're dealing with, and try to look at what you do from a broader perspective to put that into a bit larger context.
Because what I'm talking about is also what Ove mentioned, and the others also, that we are in a phase of very big transition, and there are very big uncertainties. And what we are talking about here is a little of a new way of working, also in terms of research and in connecting with industry, about using ex ante and such things, developments and studies. So I think that this transition area now, all these uncertainties, is so very important that we work together. That is exactly what you have said also, to get a better understanding what is the real world, but also what can happen in the future. Because we are more in a situation now than we have been of developing very exciting and new technologies and systems, which will not be of very high interest in the next 5 years or 10 years. We are talking about CCS. We are talking about very big biorefineries, which we see for the future, but not directly. So there is therefore an importance to work together with industry, with technologies that you don't see very interesting for the very few years ahead, but maybe in a longer future, all these technologies. So that is a little of a new situation, as I feel, in terms of research also. Would you agree to that? That there is this, that is another death of, value of death in a way. That we are talking about new technologies that we have to have new policy instruments on and new situations. Would you agree to that?
I can only iterate what I said before. We are very interested in. We have put out the enormous ambitious goal of 3 million cubic meters in 2030 in terms of renewable fuels, and when we go out into the sort of the technology market, trying to find suitable technology to realize this, there's nothing there. There is the technology available for producing HVO, which is the leading fossil-free fuel in Sweden right now. But other than that, there's nothing. So we need you as a university to help us develop these type of technologies, because the interest in Southern Europe and in the US is not that great at the moment in terms of these type of technologies.
Which leads to another problem about also about this value of death, and that is that the technologies, large-scale technologies, maybe not come in for the near future, but we need demo plants. We need developments about that, and that they need to be financed. And we have seen lots of problems of developing demo plants in these areas. How do you look at that? What can we do more together in that area? Because I think that is a crucial aspect of these things. Developing demo plants which will probably be of interest in large scale in some years to come. We have seen that. Do you have any comments about that?
I hope you others will also add on to this, but first of all, I think it's extremely important to be decisive on a demo plant is a demo plant, and that has a limited lifetime. So it is not something that necessarily should be then expected to have a very long lifetime and being employed by research project after research project. Let's face the fact, if there is a willingness to co-invest in a demo plant, it's usually also a time limit on that money. And everyone should be prepared to actually accept that money is withdrawing after the first timeline. And please save us from starting to calculate return on investment and profitability on demo plants, because that will never happen, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
Agree. I think we have a number of examples in Sweden that has not been so well taken. We have something in Värnamo, something in Piteå, something in Örnsköldsvik, and something on Hisingen on the other side of the river here that is not really good examples. I think exactly like we heard, that the demo, if it's needed to develop technology, yes, but otherwise we should go for full-scale commercial units as quickly as possible, because demos take a long time. They absorb the development of the bigger scale, and they are not commercial.
I was just going to say about the examples that you mentioned were actually quite successful, all of them, but being demo plants.
Exactly.
No, and I don't think that was intention held that they should survive. But then somebody started to kind of developing a plan for them, and that they should be in commercial in operation and all that. But I think that's the big mistake. I totally agree with you. Demo plant is a demo plant, and after the demonstration period, it should be written off, forgotten, scrapped, whatever, and not be regarded as some kind of semi-commercial plant. Sorry.
I really don't have anything more to add. I think research can be put into how to move from pilot scale directly into industrial scale. That can be of interest, to skip this demo plant stage, because you can save a lot of time. Of course, you add a lot of risk, so that's also a factor.
So we can say that there is a lack of road mapping in a way also when talking about demo plants or development of new technologies, how to do that and what are the steps and when is it finished and so on. So if there are anyone else who wants to comment, please do that. Another question is what Simon showed, that there are big opportunities for working in industrial clusters, for example, but there is a big problem to implement it for many, many reasons. Is one of the reasons that in general, when doing new energy technologies and energy efficiency, a lack of resources within your industries, that you are so squeezed, so you don't have the personnel, you don't have the competence in a way, because you don't have time to collect all that knowledge or so. Do you see that as something that should be discussed a little more?
Yeah, if Chalmers can provide more competent engineers in the future, I mean, we would be very grateful.
I don't mean competence in that way. I mean resources to keep up the competence. Okay.
Being a representative from a low margin, high volume industry, we have a very slimmed organization. Yes. to be able to cope with that sort of situation. So of course we are resource constrained.
Yes.
And we do see a potential threat in the future that our industry won't be as interesting to the future technologists coming from Chalmers. And I think, in that respect, you can help us, and we can work together in terms of promoting the interest of future students.
If I take a parallel to large investment projects, then we have an overall project director or whatever, and then we have the different areas. But what I think is very seldom visible in the context of large complex operations is what we have in investment projects, and that is the one responsible for balance of the plant. At least in our investment project we have such an area that take care of the steam distribution, all the utilities on the site. I don't know if it would be possible to find to the complexes in Stenungsund and in petrochemical side a site balance responsible that could help ease up these things, because it's in the nature of every department manager or discipline manager to first and foremost optimize their own company's advantage.
Or the own part of the company, maybe sometimes even.
It's easy to say it's a lack of resources, but I don't think that's the real answer. I think there are two other elements. One is, I think, the migration of head offices away from the sites.
Yes.
I think from a central head office and strategic department point of view, a utility investment in a remote location isn't that sexy, so to say. It's much better to invest in your core products. Beside that, I think what we have seen on the various projects like the TSA in Stenungsund, the payback time is maybe 4 years.
Yes.
That's not good enough. Normally there is sort of a hurdle line at about maybe 2 years direct payback. So I think, would it be a 1 year payback, we would find the resources.
I am chair of this IEA international group working with industry, IETS, as Simon mentioned. And as it happens, we are also there interested in very much in this long-term decision-making and ex ante, but also digitalization in industry. That is also, the other countries are very interested in that. But the question we ask us, and I would like anyone to comment about that, in general, in all these discussions, it's what's in it for industry, in process industry. Where shall we develop research together with industry? I think that is a very interesting question, and I know it's also for the Energy Agency, which is discussing that. So any comments about that? Everybody says it's important, but what shall we do? Do you have any comments on that? It's not easy, I know, but it's rather important because we say that. But what shall we do? What shall we work with? Please.
Not an easy question. We're all hesitating here.
Yes, exactly.
But I think there must not be sort of a disconnect between academia and real world in a way. So I think more interaction is one answer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the other thing is to actually gain direct involvement, long-term engagement between the academia and the companies for long-term interaction on this topic as well, instead of, and recognizing that these things will also be quite site-specific.
Yes.
Minor parts of them will be transferable, even across industries. But the first handful of cases will be very, very site-specific, I think. And that is maybe a problem for both sides, for both industry, not to see the scalability to other sites immediately. So how can we overcome that challenge, also in the digitalization area?
I have one last question, and then anyone can ask additional questions if you like, because I have lots of other things here, but I would just like to mention one thing which I think is crucial for biorefineries, for CCS, for whatever we are talking about, and that is better knowledge and more research on value chains. I would like you or anyone else working with value chains to comment upon that. How shall we work more with value chains? What haven't we discussed today, for example, that should be better involved in research dealing with value chains? I think Uwe mentioned value chain. Please, Lars.
Value chains or even more business models.
Business models, maybe even.
I
yes.
don't think
yes.
we need more research on projects that will never have a positive margin at all. And sometimes we start those kind of projects. I think having a checkpoint very early, is this a reasonable value chain, and is there a potential to have a commercial development of this project, should be done early in every assessment of project proposals.
I think the problem is if the value chain is predefined. Let the value chain and the business model come out of the development and the actors finding each other. Not predefined that now you are assigned this role, you get that role, and so on. That is only bound to employ people for the research money and create little or no results.
But that can also be a research area to identify the value chains possible, so to say, and discuss them, of course.
Yeah, well, I agree what you say. But I think you shouldn't really freeze this from the start if you kind of... I think this, eventually it comes, of course, if you have the right people around the table, the right companies, and the right kind of innovative spirit, it comes from itself, more or less. In some cases, it might make sense to define the value. Of course, you can define the value chain, but don't define the kind of the players from the start. I think that's kind of strangling the innovation.
I agree what Mikael said, but I also disagree, because sometimes, I mean, innovation are created from, you start with a very focused research topic, and that is developed into an actual business. And then from that business, you do realize that, we can add another value chain, taking out this certain molecule here, or
yes.
do some other fancy chemistry and create additional value. And we've seen this in our sun pine plant, where we started out by taking out the fatty acids, and then we realized that there is other interesting molecules in this stream as well, and now we've added more business on a already existing plant. So it's, I mean, I do agree with you, Mikael, that it's not good to be too focused from the beginning, but that can also be a driver towards something broader.
But not to be too focused can also mean that you can identify where there are possible value chains which can be of interest, and to do that early on in a big project, as Lars said. I think that is a lesson to take home for us. Yes?
I have nothing against focus, but assigning specific roles to each and every one around the table, that is the problem.
Yes. Anyone else having questions or comments? In that case, I think we can finish this. I would like to thank very much the industry panel. Thank you very much. And all the presenters, very much. And finally, and not the least, Ulrika, who has made lots of things around this also. Thank you, Ulrika. So, thank you very much.